Hi, I'm Megan Greenwell, and this is The Kicker from CJR. Today, my guest is Jasper Wang, who's a dear friend of mine and also the head business guy at Defector, which he refers to as a socialist commune of sports writers. I wanted to have him on because he's the smartest guy I know about the future of worker-owned media, the headwinds facing subscription-based businesses, and where we're all going as people who are rooting for small, scrappy media enterprises to survive and multiply. Jasper Wang, welcome to The Kicker. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
How do you explain what your job is to a normal person?
I say I am the business person for a socialist commune of sports and culture writers.
I love that. And what does being the business person mean?
It is, in practice, everything from like office assistant up to CFO. And sometimes there is like sexy business stuff of like, oh, I get to negotiate the deals or whatever. And then there's most of the time it's very nitty gritty stuff. Like making sure payroll gets processed, filing invoices. The Ohio Department of Unemployment calls and says you owe $16, and I have to figure out why we owe $16 and how to pay those $16. So the like real nitty gritty stuff of administering a business.
I'm famously not a business person, but I'm interested in media business. As you know, we worked together to help set up the early days of Defector. I think most people who listen to this podcast probably know what Defector is, but how do you explain what Defector is and what it does for people who don't know?
Yes. Defector is a worker-owned and operated website mostly, but media company in the sense that we also have an array of podcasts. Most famously, we have Normal Gossip, for which you were a season 1 guest. And my original 18 co-founders were all writers and editors out of Deadspin, which was, of course, the sports imprint under the Gawker media empire before all of that went to shit. Am I allowed to curse on this podcast?
Sure. I don't know the answer. Okay, great. Well, the reason I wanted to have you on, as you know, is because you wrote Defector's annual report last year, published it in November. And as far as I know, you've always written the annual reports, but this one was written in the first person. And this one was unlike any annual report I've ever read for anything, because you have like these long passages where you're ruminating on not only 5 years of Defector, but what it means for the media industry, all of this kind of stuff. And I'm curious, like, what made you want this year to sort of take this tonal shift and almost write it like, hello, here's me, the person, and here are all of my thoughts about what we're doing here?
Yeah. So, yes, this was our 5th annual report. We publish an annual report every fall. Originally, it started out as an internal document because Defector never took outside money. So we don't have outside shareholders. And, you know, I come from a traditional business background. I got my MBA from Wharton. I was a management consultant for 10 years. I'm just used to having sort of like a quarterly or at least annual cadence of like reporting and holding yourself accountable. So wrote it originally as an internal document to be like, okay, like this is where we're at and everybody knows and we can celebrate and we can, you know, see what's working and what's not working. And at some point somebody said, hey, this might just work as an external facing thing. And we've published it every year since. I think it does a couple of things for us. One, it does hold us accountable. Like we mean that when we say subscribers pay for the business, and we owe them something of, you know, how it is that we're spending their money. It's decent marketing, both in the sense of people who might otherwise be looking to unsubscribe because they don't read enough. They're like, oh, I like this part of it, so I'm going to keep subscribing. And like people, interested media parties are often reaching out to be like, how are things doing? How are things going? How do you do this? We might want to work on something like this ourselves. And so just to be able to say, hey, read this so you have a sense of what it is, was just useful and saved me time. Coming up on 5 years, I think I put a little bit of pressure on myself of like 5 years. It's like a number that feels weighty, and so we should do something more with that. And also, I was just getting bored of, you can only say like, oh, we got better at sending emails so many times in so many ways before it's like boring for myself to write, and I imagine boring for people to read. So I had a little bit of writer's block coming up to writing it, and at some point, somebody said to me, like, you should just write more in your own voice and just say some stuff about maybe a little bit broader than just Defector. So, yeah, then that sort of broke through the writer's block, and I just had some musings. You know, at this point, we have been able to help other publications get off the ground. I take it as a regular part of my job that I'm talking to groups of journalists who might want to start their own ventures. And so I just felt like I had a bit of a cross-section that was worth talking about. And then probably the most sort of like proximate reason to take a broader view is over the summer, Defector, alongside Start.coop, which is a nonprofit worker cooperative accelerator, we won a joint grant from the Press Forward initiative to build shared operational services for independent media companies. So in some ways, I was thrusting Defector into the role of making some actual choices for other people, at which point it felt only fair to talk a little bit about the thinking that underpins that.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk in more detail about all of that, but I want to step back a little because, you know, Defector has taken on this sort of like godfather of worker-owned media role in a way that, to me, has been so cool to watch. And I'm curious, like, it's been 5 years. 5 years ago, you were doing this really radical thing. Now, you know, it's still not the norm, but it's not totally radical. So what has it been like for you to sort of see that transition, be part of that transition, and are you where you thought you would be 5 years ago?
Well, first, it's incredibly gratifying to see other journalists launch their own collectives. And yeah, I don't want to take any credit, really, besides, in many cases, just like an hour or two on the phone with them, sharing some documents when it makes sense. But, you know, it's such a great part of the job anytime a new publication launches, and, you know, they thank Defector publicly for that. And, you know, we take that role seriously, while, you know, remaining humble about what we know and don't know. Anybody who's talked to us knows that I start every conversation with, like, we'll tell you anything you want, but the caveat is this is just how we do it. And we have no idea if that's the right way to do it or if that's going to work for you. We're just giving you one model on how to do that. So that part is so nice. In terms of where we were 5 years ago versus today, I mean, I don't know. In the very, very beginning, I mean, you were involved in this. It felt very touch and go. Just like, is this going to work? Then within a couple months, it was like, oh, this is working. This will work. And then the last couple years for us has been a story of stability that, if you wanted to read it negatively, would be one of, you know, stagnancy. You know, we've been sort of around 40,000 paid subscribers for a couple years now, and we're opening new revenue streams and, you know, optimizing costs and whatever. So the business is still doing well. But, you know, I think that's a lesson in itself as well of the media environment that we launched into in 2020 and grew in 2021 and 2022. And, you know, sort of the more difficult environment for macroeconomic reasons, for subscription fatigue reasons, for, you know, ongoing loss of job reasons in the media space. You know, it is tougher sledding. And so in 2020, it felt hard when we launched, but as I wrote in the annual report, it's practically easy mode compared to launching something now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One of the reasons I think a lot of people were super intrigued by your annual report is because so much of the discourse around worker-owned media, I think, has felt to a lot of people a little one-dimensional, right? Like, we all want this to exist. We all want this to be really successful. It is really successful in several cases, right? But it has been so easy, I think, for some people to be like, great, everything should move in this direction, right? Worker-owned media will save journalism, all of that stuff. And you while still, I think, appropriately reveling in Defector's success and the success of this segment of the industry, we're also like, I want to be honest here about what the headwinds are, about what the limitations are, all of those things. And there was this quote I thought was really great. You write, when Defector staffers speak to journalists interested in starting their own publications, with some frequency we sense that they are naively imagining worker ownership as a panacea to the ills of their previous workplaces, and treating meaningful subscription revenue as a foregone conclusion. But the truth is that launching your own business is hard, and much harder today than it was 5 years ago. And then later in the piece you talk about, all of the advantages that you guys had 5 years ago that no longer exist now. So, just being a healthier industry, you were able to get pandemic funding, there were more jobs in the world, there were all of these advantages. So how do you think back, or how do you think forward, I guess, on, there are all these headwinds and also we want this to keep growing. How are you squaring all of that in your head?
Yeah. I think the naivete, to just double click on that a little bit. And if anybody's listening to this and they feel like I'm specifically speaking about their naivete, rest assured I've talked to many, many people. I mean, it's not 100 people, but it's 50 people, 50 groups of people at this point over 5 years. I think there is often a contradiction where journalists are scared of asking people for money, and then simultaneously they assume that once they get up the courage to ask for money, the money will be there. And basically neither of those things is correct. You can't be scared to ask for money. You have to be asking for money all the time. And it will be hard to get people to give you money. And so I think that's one sort of naivete. And then there's an operational one too, which is you did not like your boss, but did you not like the institution of bosses, or did you just not have good bosses? And by the way, if you are worker owned, you all have to be each other's bosses, and you have to be comfortable being somebody's boss and having your peer be your boss. And that I think people sometimes are not mentally, psychologically prepared for that. Mm-hmm. And sometimes now when I check in with people, it feels like you're almost stepping in as a group therapist. Because you didn't think through decision rights and processes and what if things go wrong and who can you be mad at is often how I say it. When you work in a traditional workplace, it's very obvious who you're mad at. You are mad at your boss. You are mad at the CEO. You are mad at the outside shareholders. You're mad at the private equity fund, whatever. There's all sorts of people that rightfully you can and should be mad at when things go poorly. If you're a worker-owned company, you can only be mad at each other. You can be mad at yourself. You can be mad at each other. And how do you use that feeling productively and not destructively is a big question. In terms of squaring that with the going forward part of it, I think between Defector and your Hellgates of the world and your 404 Medias, there is just more templates for doing it. Mm. And we just have more knowledge collectively of things to watch out for and things that work well and things that you have to figure out for yourself and things that we can replicate. And so the shared services grant, this project that we've taken on, is systematizing that knowledge that has emerged and, adding a sheen of okay, let's talk to some professionals and feel like here are the different pathways and here's some resources and here's a vendor you can talk to. And by the way, you can just buy this from us, this service that you've been looking for. So we want to make it easier while acknowledging it won't be easy. And I mean, as with everything, people want to just celebrate the successes. And so to your point, it does feel one note of yes, this works, keep it working. This will really be, you will know it's to the next level once there are public failures and be okay with that. You can't just when you go to business school, you take corporate finance, the first lesson you learn is like risk equals reward. And if you want more reward, you have to take more risk. And I think that is just true in so many parts of life. Like if we have no failures, that means we're not taking enough risk. We're not standing up enough different organizations. There's not enough journalists out there feeling like they can go out and try that on their own. So, if we were to check in, 18 months from now, I would say it would be a failure if there are no public failures of people who gave it a go and it didn't work for whatever reason. But they felt supported enough, they felt encouraged, they felt that there was infrastructure for them to take a shot.
And you think that's likely to be the shift that happens in the next 18 months?
I'm not doing like trend reporting necessarily or like any sort of forecasting here. I'm just saying as we launch shared services and, try to help nurture one corner of the ecosystem, the goal is not to have all successes. Mm-hmm. The goal is to be able to get a whole cohort off the ground, and some of them will fail. Mm-hmm. You want a big enough cohort that some fail. Like 3 out of 3, 100% success rate. That's great. 8 out of 10, it's a worse success rate because only 80%, but that's 5 more organizations that have been stood up, right? And so we have to sort of think a little bit more expansively.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, let's talk a little more about this grant because it does feel exciting. And also it's like, it's on one hand sexy, right? Because it's like helping stand up new organizations. And it's on the other hand as unsexy as it gets because you're like really excited about like providing bookkeeping services and HR and whatever. So without the like, leave out any business world speak and just tell me like what this means for I'm an organization that wants to start up. How are you going to help me now that you have this $1.5 million in grant funding?
Yeah. So we want to be able to meet the needs of folks who are just thinking about this in a more systematized way. That is not like you have to call Defector and Hellgate and Racket, Minnesota and Colorado Sun and Chicago Block Club, right? We're collecting as much of that experience as we can and giving you self-serve resources that are like, here is the stories. In some cases, those will be literal case studies of like, this is how Block Club Chicago did things, and this is how Hellgate does things. In some cases, it'll just be like, this is one expert, who, by the way, you weren't previously going to be able to get in touch with, giving you the rundown of like, do you want to be an LLC or a corporation or you're in a state that has a legal worker cooperative, or you want to be a nonprofit newsroom? Here are the ways to think about that. By the way, some of these resources exist in different places. We're saying like, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. If it makes sense to just, beg, borrow, and steal some stuff, it's like, that's great. And we'll credit appropriately and just put them in a place where, people can access them all together. Like I am working on a document that is open on my computer right now that I've had open for a couple of weeks that is just called the money document, because it's not that any of there's like unknown pools of money out there or unknown revenue streams. It's just, is there a place where people can read all the different ways you could potentially approach it? Again, I'm not in the world of journalism support organizations broadly. There may be some handful of people listening to this to be like, we have that resource. In which case, like, please email it to me and we'll credit it and we'll, incorporate it. But just sort of like plain spoken resources that also have a point of view. Like it can't just be like, here's everything. There has to be like a logic tree and like a directional recommendation of like, if you're looking for this, be like this. If you're looking like this, be like this. Right? So that's sort of the like pre-launch group. By the way, if you're like, we are going to launch, then we say, here's a set of lawyers who we have vetted. We know they're good. We vouch for their work. They're going to give you a good rate. Come and they'll sort of get your, startup packed registration with the government and, helping you get set up with a bank account, like that sort of stuff. Like we'll get that all going for you. You go to the other side, and I don't want to talk about anyone else's specific business, but there are many successful work cooperative publications out there who should be so proud of all that they've accomplished so far without really any sort of back office business support. And so forecasting a subscription business is not easy, but it's also not rocket science, right? It's just like some adeptness with Excel. It is like some sense of how Stripe works. Like today, if you asked any number of people, by the way, this is probably true at a lot of like corporate media places too. Right? There's lots of places where I hear about their inner workings. I'm really not impressed by that. Of like, okay, how do you forecast cash flow a year from now? You don't have to spend tens of thousands of dollars to get somebody to give you their best guess at that, right? Like we can templatize some of this stuff. We can have a bookkeeper on call that, you keep on a small retainer a couple hours a month, and they provide stuff like that for you. HR, it's a place I love talking about HR. I when I was a management consultant, did a lot of like org design work and stuff. I understand why nobody invests in HR early on, whether that is in media or anywhere else where people are launching businesses. That stuff is really important, and you don't know you need it until things start falling apart, right? And I would argue if you're going to be worker-owned, it's actually even more important to have some sense of that stuff up front. Like decision rights stuff, you got to get on the same page of like who's allowed to make decisions. You can't operate by consensus. Maybe if you're like 3 or 4 people, you could loosely operate by consensus, but you get to a certain size and it's like, oh, we never decided who gets to decide, and now we're just sitting here staring at each other in a standoff, So there's just all that on its own. None of those things is particularly sexy. But I think it really would move the ball forward for people if they knew that that was available for them. And in some of these cases, even that is overstating it. Like sometimes I'll get a phone call from somebody. Somebody will like email me and sort of be like, oh, I don't want to bother you, but if you could spare some time, it'd be wonderful. And I get on the phone with them, and it's like a very basic question where I was like, you should have just emailed this to me, and I would have emailed you back while I was waiting on the subway, and we would have been good. But you didn't know how straightforward of a question that was. And so if we just had people on call, it could be me. Like I may very well end up being one of the people on call in the project. Would you just formalized it? Where you're like, hey, I have this minor problem. It's the example I've used a bunch of times, so I'm just going to keep using it, where somebody set up time with me and called me and was like, we have an extra $100,000. What do we do with that? I was like, well, you're the business owner. You can do whatever you want with it. But all I would say is just like, don't leave it in your checking account. Have a high yield savings account, open a CD, run some sort of process internally if you want to like figure out where to invest in a project. But, that's not like you didn't need some serious specialized skill. You just needed somebody to tell you that you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Or, please make sure you're getting 3.5% interest rate on it or whatever, So, yeah, I think many people would launch a business if they felt like they had even just that little bit of backstopping. They had somebody to go ask stuff for. Sometimes I'm talking to people who are thinking about launching, and they're like, they get really hung up on just like, I can't own an LLC. Like, how could I possibly register an LLC? And I'm like, you know how many evil or stupid people are opening LLCs all the time, every day, and you're not evil and you're not stupid, so you're already ahead of like a lot of those people,
Yeah.
And so some of it is just like that. You just need somebody to be like, hey, you're not going to get sued because that's not what the New York State Department of State bothers to look at. The IRS, under this administration, maybe they're not going after anybody. So don't worry so much. It's like a lot of anxieties are just somehow I'm going to be in trouble with the government, or whatever.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to laugh at me, and it's just like, no, it'll be okay.
I own a business, so if I can do it, literally anybody can do it, because famously I am a business idiot. So, so if that's holding you back and you're listening, please, it's real easy. I think this is so cool because it is so many, like you say, like these small questions that are small, that people who are new to it do not are small. And so bringing that all together is so helpful for people. And also, none of this matters for publications that can't build a subscription base, right? And I am sure that you get calls from people who maybe even have a great idea for a publication, but you don't necessarily see the path to building a real subscription base. So what do you tell people when they call you, for the very first time and they're like, I want to launch a publication, and you're trying to get them to think through the hard questions about whether they can build something real and sustainable?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and to rephrase it it's a thorny question that our working team, Defector, Start.coop, the other folks that we have brought into the working team, are working through, because people will say their biggest problem is revenue. Totally makes sense. And to what extent should a shared services project have to provide for some sort of a subscription growth arm of this? And I'm sort of two minds, where it's like, yeah, people say time and time again that is their biggest problem. On the other hand, you can't outsource that, both because you know best what audience you are trying to connect with and how your product interacts with it. And the only way to fix it might be the editorial product. And so you don't want an outside party telling you things like that. That's not actually a good relationship to be in. And by the way, there actually are plenty of subscription growth consultants out there who, can help you, optimize your email drip campaigns and things like that. And so, again, to the extent that we're not trying to reinvent anything, we may end up linking up with them, or have them sort of as a recommended third party. But I don't actually want to go too deep into people feeling like they can show up and we will hold their hands on that. But to your point, forcing people to think through it, I will say, sometimes people call me and I will in my head be like, I don't think this is a business. But that's not what they're coming to me for. And that is presumptuous for me to think that I actually know better. I was not in media previously. I would not dare go so far as to say that's not a business. But part of what we're doing is setting up to say, okay, well, look, here are a bunch of different revenue streams. You could pursue it in these different ways. If you're going to pursue a subscription business, what is the offering? Does the math work for you to eventually get there? I talked to an existing publication that is in a metro area of 100,000 people. And if you do the top-down math on that, are you going to convince 10% of this metro area to subscribe to your new publication? Maybe 10 years down the line, but not tomorrow, right? So you can't be a subscription-funded business with, a headcount of a half dozen in that area. And again, I don't want to talk about anybody else's business, but this is a place that I admire for sort of knowing that and making it work, in addition with philanthropy and some amount of ad revenue, and making that all work together. And so that's all a very long way of both giving you a non-answer and saying, we have to do a better job of teeing people up so they're thinking in that sort of business critical way.
Yeah.
It is not just me and 3 friends who got laid off are all just going to do the thing we previously were going to do.
Yeah.
And look, I'm a very pro-labor person. Again, head of a socialist commune of writers. In some of these cases, the answer is not that your boss was bad and mismanaged this. The answer was that's not a business necessarily that needed as many headcount as they previously had. And they made some tough choices to keep the rest of that publication floating. So, you just got to really think hard about this stuff up front, and hopefully we give people tools to do that structured thinking.
Let's go back to Defector. you mentioned, within a couple of years, Defector raced out to 40,000 subscribers. Huge triumph. And now a couple of years later, you're still at 40,000 subscribers. That's a great sustainable business. If that is a normal business, not a socialist commune, you're going to have people saying, what the hell, you need to grow tomorrow. How do you think about that?
Yeah. So we do still grow revenue a bit. We opened display ads on the site at some point in the last year. Our podcast business continues to grow. So we are still growing a bit. But yes, I do think, and this is true, again, I come from a very traditional business background. When I check in with friends and acquaintances, they're like, oh, well, 0.5% growth, or you wrote 1.5%. I forget what the imputed growth rate we wrote was. And then, people in media observers as well, just like, what are you going to do for growth? And that is just a mentality that I have to be like, that's not the goal. The goal is to, our biggest commitment is to take care of the people that we have on staff and do our very best to keep those jobs stable. And so, yeah, is there a version where we spent X dollar because we're chasing X times 2? Lots of companies could do that. We have made that choice. We're not doing that because our tolerance for taking a chunk of cash that would otherwise be going into people's salaries, it's not there. And so that's a feature, not a bug of the way that we're set up. And I also, to sort of adjacent to what you just asked, but I sort of think there's this thing about business that a business is just whatever. It's a container for whatever you want, right? And so I'm really responding here to the idea that people are like, oh, you guys don't do any video. You guys don't do any TikToks. You guys aren't really on YouTube. How are you going to survive if everyone gets their news that way? And the answer is maybe we won't. If 10 years from now, every adult gets all of their news on TikTok, we were just not meant to survive in that. What do we have? We have people who are bloggers, who like to write, people who like to read and write. We have some people who have other skill sets who can be on mic. We have some people who would be willing to be on video. But that's not who we are. And so is there a version of this company? Everybody wishes they were working at a transformational, generational company. It's also fine for your company to be supporting the people and optimize using their skill sets to put out a product that you like to be creating. And that's fine. I would love it if we were growing and we could hire more people and we could give more end of year bonuses. But this is just the business that we're in. This is what we like to do. Mm-hmm. And we'll do change things on the margin. We'll invest in things that people have energy to do. Sometimes when people are like, why don't you do that? And it's because we don't want to. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if we end up leaving money on the table, that's okay.
But nor are you saying, I'm completely uninterested in growth. We can just rest on our laurels right now, right? A lot of that annual report is you trying to figure out, is this the year we finally raise prices, right? Which you've never done in the 5-year history of the company.
Yeah.
Is this, will this promotion bring some more people in than this one did? All of those things. There is a version of a socialist writers commune where they're we literally don't care if we ever add another subscriber. Right? So why do you care? Why is there any focus on running a promotion, potentially raising prices, whatever?
Yeah, no, exactly. I don't want to. I have now staked out this terrain. my blockbuster died a graceful death terrain that I don't really even believe in. The truth is, I am closer to yes, I would love to be growing more. I would love if instead of a couple of percentage points, we had 10% growth next year. But part of it is also decision making at a place like this is slower by definition. And so sharpening the editorial product is a thing that, Tom Lay, our editor-in-chief, is always thinking about. But how that directive ends up showing up, it is not like he is not. I'm not trying not to say any other publications' names out loud. Like, he is not a person who can just snap his fingers and like everybody starting on Monday does their job differently for fear of being fired or, whatever else HR process you have to instill fear in people or motivate people, I guess, also. Like, we tighten and we change direction of ship relatively slowly. And we have to do it in a way that people generally feel proud of, right? And so, Tom is always saying things like, I want us to be more focused on this story or this category or, this way. Here come some blogs recently that I think we should all be proud of, and here's the things we can learn from it. But there's no, like, drastic strategic shifts that are coming, right? And so on the pure business side as well, like, okay, we got to think about, we're going to raise prices. We are the owners and the operators and most of us, the writers and the editors, and you have to sort of put all those different hats on and say, do I like the direction? Like, we send the promotion out, and at a different publication, a writer who's like, I don't like that copy, or I don't like the way that's presenting our company, they can just say, it was, over the firewall. Like, those business assholes did that. Like, at Defector, that's just not the case. Like, everybody also has to wear that hat on. And so sometimes it just takes a minute to get everybody on board.
But to take the extreme socialist perspective, why does any of that matter? Why do you have to do any of that? Why is there ever a promotion, right? Why can't you just let the bloggers do the blogs, be very happy that you have 40,000 subscribers, and never worry about raising a penny more than what you are earning routinely, predictably now?
Yeah. I think there's a couple different ways to answer that question. One is just the fact of inflation. And so if you want your take-home pay to keep going up and not feel squeezed, we do have to grow some amount to make that work for ourselves. Otherwise, you're effectively, losing your salary by some percentage points every year. Part of that is, frankly, let's call it ego, and maybe the most negative way to frame it, of like, you want every writer, editor out there wants their work to reach more people, reach people. And it's not anybody, but like, you want to reach an audience that cares about what you do and wants to keep coming back to you and feel like your writing matters, right? And so in some ways, that's the vision of like reaching people who would be interested in our stuff and believing that there are still other people out there who want that. And then it's just a matter of like, how do we get in front of them? How do we make this appealing to them? How do we get them to keep returning? How do we make them, come put the money so that they're on this side of the paywall? In some ways, you could just say that's the game. Like, it's not just the same people reading us every day.
Related to that, you wrote in the annual report about how there's been essentially no turnover at Defector in 5 years, which is like such a luxury in so many ways, right? It also means that like you can't hire younger, cooler people.
Totally.
Almost ever, right? And, the people you have aren't changing who they are. You're not getting new people in. Like, how do you think about what evolution looks like, even if it's not like rocket ship growth, natural evolution to stay current, stay relevant when the core group of people is the same?
Yes. As I wrote in the report, every 28-year-old becomes 33 5 years later. It's crazy. That's how it goes. So how do you replenish your 20-something's perspective, or at least just feel like you're current? It's a really tough question. I think from the flip side, the like positive side, we've worked together for so long. We trust each other. We sort of see the ways in which people can evolve. And so if I just pick somebody, Patrick Redford, one of our bloggers who, already covered so many different coverage areas, we knew he could expand his skill set. This year we sent him to the Tour de France. so he could do on-site reporting about cycling. And he is now anchoring 2 podcasts for us. So part of it is just you give people opportunities to do different things with their time. They have to be willing to do that. They have to be, willing to have sometimes their weeks be much more hectic than if they did not raise their hand to do things like that. Every time that we do get to hire, we are always looking for that. Not just youth, but like what adds something to the overall perspective of the company. But yeah, it is tough. 5 years ago, you were like, oh, we're all going to keep working together. It's like, oh, that can only be upside. Yeah. And then you really think about it and you're like, oh, no, there is some downside to this and you lose flexibility. We can't just say, hey, we want another WNBA writer. We have a couple people writing more WNBA blogs than last season over the course of another season. But it's not like we're a type of company where at a different company, it's like, all right, cool. Well, you just lost somebody naturally from attrition. They took a different job and we'll just use that headcount and hire a new WNBA writer. Like we don't have that. I should say about a year and a half ago, we talked about acquiring somebody's Substack. It was like an individual newsletter writer. And we talked a little bit about what it would look like if they just came on board at Defector and we just took over their subscriptions. And therefore, they're sort of like underwriting some of their own salary. And it didn't go all the way. Obviously, we didn't end up doing that. But it was useful to think about like, okay, well, how big of a size does it make sense? If your own newsletter list is so big, you don't actually want to join us. You would just gladly keep doing what you're doing. If there's too much overlap with Defector's existing subscription, where it's duplicative, how would we, as you know, at Defector, people sort of cover a lot of different areas. If you have a very narrow focus on your Substack, what does that look like to plug you into existing Defector editorial processes? So we did some thinking about that. I'm open to that idea that actually the next step is sort of a very targeted acquisition, which probably wouldn't look like any extra cash out the door. It's just like we now have hired you and you bring over your subscribers. So there's ways around it. We haven't quite figured that out.
Mm-hmm. Last question for you. What did you have to learn the hard way about working in media that you wish somebody had just given you the advice early in your career?
The real honest answer is that media loves talking about media so much, man. And this is what we're doing. Like we could be having coffee and we're doing it on a podcast. And so there just is sort of like that part of it of people are watching and people are talking and people are blogging about it and people are doing podcasts about it. And I always laugh where, I'll meet up with a business school friend and they'll be like, oh, your job is so cool. And I'm like, well, I make significantly less money than you. And yes, I get to, do this cool media stuff. If you name searched yourself on Google or Blue Sky or Twitter, there will also not be anybody talking shit about your company or talking shit about you personally. So, I'm half joking, but, half saying a truth here. Media loves gossiping about media.
That's true. And thank you for roasting the premise of my podcast on my podcast. Yeah. I really appreciate that. I think that's the perfect note to end on. Jasper, thank you for coming. It's been a real pleasure to have this talk, not over beers for once, but just like in a studio. No, yeah, this is fun, Megan. Well, I'm glad that we have been able to turn this into content for you. Thank you. Thank you. It's all about the content. All right. The Kicker is a production of the Columbia Journalism Review. Amanda Dara is our producer, and I'm your host, Megan Greenwell. You can subscribe to us wherever you get podcasts, and please do. And we'll be back with you in 2 weeks.